Hello, welcome back to Leaders Live. Charlie Stevens, your host. Always happy to be here. We got a really special guest today, Sean Doherty, the chairman of the T1D Fund. Before we bring in Sean and learn a little bit about his history, his past, how he's growing out the T1D Fund, we're going to bring in our supporting partner, Michael Mara, the CEO of Entre, social networking group. Mike, are you there?
Hey, Charlie, what's going on?
How you doing, Mike?
Really good, really good. Yeah, excited for another episode of Leaders Live. And Sean's doing incredible work, and I'm really excited to learn more about this. I think I'm really excited to hear his story and everything that they're doing there. For everyone who's watching on social and YouTube, feel free to drop in your contact info, what you're doing, what you're working on, and questions for Sean as we go through this. Drop in your Entre profiles. If you're already on the app, if you're not, you can sign up and connect with other entrepreneurs, investors, freelancers for free at joinentre.com. Super easy, a lot of cool stuff going on. We have a bunch of these types of events, but we're also doing pitch competitions, office hours, all sorts of stuff to help entrepreneurs out. And I'll be on here in the background, keeping an eye on questions, Q&A towards the end, and really excited for this. So cool. let's bring Sean up here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Before we get started, we'll bring Sean in, though. Just the reason why we're doing this show, we're talking with CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, venture capital funds, understand how they operate, communicate that with the community, and hopefully we can connect them with like-minded business leaders, help them grow their business. Hopefully we could grow with them together. That goes with everybody who's watching the show as well. So with that being said, let's bring in Sean, chairman, T1D Fund. Sean, welcome to the Leaders Live show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Mike. It's really nice of you guys to have me on.
Absolutely. We're excited. I mean, obviously, you are a well-established business leader, started off Bain Capital executive, and then, started the T1D Fund in 2015. But let's just kind of get into the T1D Fund before we kind of talk about your past and what you've learned and all this other stuff. Obviously, it's very important to you. It's very important to the community, helping people out. But I mean, it's the largest nonprofit focused on type 1 diabetes. You're accelerating the research of it. But can you give us a little bit more of what you're doing there so that the community can understand?
Sure. The T1D Fund is a venture philanthropy fund, and I can explain more about what we mean when we say that, as we go on. But it's dedicated to driving a cure for type 1 diabetes. So it's part of JDRF, which JDRF is a very large public charity and supplies a majority of the funding for type 1 diabetes research around the world. We're sort of an arm of JDRF that is, supercharging using our methods to the goal of what JDRF has been after for 50 years, which is to cure this disease.
Yep, absolutely. So you're treating this as a venture fund almost to accelerate type 1 diabetes. This is something that people haven't done before. Usually you just start a philanthropy fund and you try to solve a problem, but this is obviously trying to accelerate that. So how are you doing that with that I guess process?
Yeah, well, about 5 years ago, a small group of volunteers within JDRF, observed kind of a fundamental problem, a fundamental blockage in us realizing our potential to cure type 1 diabetes. And that was that the life sciences venture capital market was pretty uninvolved. And by pretty uninvolved, I mean only like a handful of scale deals that had really ever happened in the space. And there are a few reasons for that. I think people confuse type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is an autoimmune disease. Actually has an awful lot in common with celiac or rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis in the way that it develops. So it's a very different disease from type 2. People are confused about that. I think people were confused a little bit, or assumed that insulin is a cure. So my son has had type 1 diabetes since 2002. He's 20 years old now. He was diagnosed kind of out of the blue right around his second birthday. And he takes daily, literally, moment to moment infusions of insulin through a pump attached to his body permanently. That's a life support system. I think there was a lot of assumptions that, insulin was taking care of the problem. It isn't. And our goal was to change people's perception and to attract life sciences VCs into the market where they really weren't playing at all.
You're taking all the returns from this fund and putting it right back into the investment, which is pretty unique. I mean, usually people are looking to make money out of this. This is obviously a nonprofit. What type of the investments are you focused on? I mean, you talked about the life sciences, but if I talk to a typical VC, they're the structure of which sector in and how much money they're kind of looking to throw into these startups. So can you give us maybe a little bit of a thesis of the fund?
Right. Well, this is set up as a philanthropic fund. So we accept philanthropic donations, but then we turn around and invest in companies. There are really two reasons that we set it up as a nonprofit venture fund as opposed to a for-profit. The first is we're putting all of our eggs in one basket. We are a fund that doesn't want to invest and will not actually invest in a company unless we think that it has a practical and financeable way to drive cure therapies in type 1 diabetes. And so it's super concentration risk. Most venture funds, they might be involved in some subsectors or whatever, but this is extraordinary concentration. The second and more important reason, honestly, is that you always in the investment business want to know how your dollar is more valuable than the next person's dollar. We are attached to JDRF and to the Helmsley Charitable Trust, another one of our big funders, which are both charities. Helmsley is a private foundation. Because we're set up as a philanthropy, we can take advantage of all of the resources, the global network of JDRF and Helmsley and all of their resources in a way that a for-profit fund just couldn't. You can't, for tax reasons, just attach yourself to a charity like that. And so we thought that this was the best model, and I think the last 4 years have really proven that out.
Invested into over 20 early stage companies, is that correct?
Yep, we've invested in 24 companies so far. We've invested about $65 million so far.
Okay, so when you look at those types of companies, are they solely aligned with type 1 diabetes research, or what is the criteria that you look at when you're investing into those companies?
Well, there's really two parts of the analysis. First is the mission. First and foremost is mission. We are in this to drive the cure of type 1 diabetes. So the company has to have type 1 diabetes as either its entire focus or part of its focus, or it's willing to make it part of its focus. And then the second part of the analysis is it investable? We try to look at our companies the exact same way that a life sciences VC would. Is there a real identified product that can be delivered to patients? And now let's back up from that. How long do we expect that's going to take? How much capital is that going to take? Who is an interested buyer? Is this a company that could maybe go public? Is it a drug that we think that that the payers are going to pay for, the insurance companies are going to pay for? Is it going to be within a cost range that's practical? All the kind of things that a life sciences VC would want to know. But why is that? Tie it back to our original mission. The reason we're in this game is we want to attract life sciences venture capitalists to come into the type 1 diabetes fight and over time take it over.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, the focus of being venture partnered, right? So the value proposition of being with the venture community. There's obviously a strong network there, but maybe can you talk about how the VC community helps out and how you work with them in particular?
Right. Well, our goal is to bring them into every one of our deals, and that is in fact the case. So we aren't trying to buy any of these companies outright. In fact, because we're using donor money, we want to use the minimum amount of donor capital that we can in order to achieve the result we're trying to achieve. We view it as a very good thing that most of the capital of the cap table of any one of these companies is dominated by institutional venture capitalists. So when we started, in our first year in business, for every dollar we invested, we attracted about $1.70 of institutional venture capital money. In the 12 months we just concluded in June, we attracted about $7.20 for every dollar that we invested. And it was, you know, almost linear between those two things. And to us, that's an indication that the life sciences VC community and, you know, broader pharma community is getting a sense that this is a disease that affects 20 million people around the world, and we are treating it symptomatically by injecting insulin into people around the clock instead of getting at the root causes of the disease to cure it. We view that as a massive opportunity for commercial interest to come in and help solve this problem.
Yeah, it should be noted too. I mean, I think New York City is taking a strong focus to this. I've been talking to Maria Gotch, the Partnership Fund for New York City, and they're very bullish on the life science community. So that could be possibly someone I'd love to make an introduction to for you. You talked about the growth of it. I mean, you're obviously building this out pretty good. I think that kind of falls back to, you know, you being an executive at Bain Capital. I'm curious of like some of the lessons learned from working there that helped you grow this. Again, we have a lot of entrepreneurs or founders, investors that are kind of watching this in that joint Entre community. But what were some of the lessons learned from running a successful business at Bain?
I'd say my first inspiration around this came from really a group of somewhere between, you know, 8 to 10 volunteers around the table at JDRF that brought a lot of business experience from all over the place. And, you know, it's really, really cool when a group of people not only shares a passion, but shares, you know, a real drive to change the answer. And so the inspiration from this really came out of a group of people staring at each other and saying, you know, very, very simply, one of the volunteers, a guy named Grant Beard, is on our board, said from the beginning, if we don't do it, who will? And that inspiration was great. As to, you know, my experience from Bain Capital, you know, there's no organization I think more highly of than Bain Capital, specifically on this. I'd say over the, you know, the 14 years I was there, and, you know, for 8 years before, I worked directly with Bain Capital in an outside capacity. What I learned from Bain Capital's culture is identify problems, challenges, opportunities very specifically. What is it that's making any situation the way that it is? And what specifically can you do to change that answer? And then do it, and then do it again, and test to make sure that your hypothesis is right, and be action oriented. Look at problems that you think should be solved, see if they can be solved, devise a mechanism to solve them, and then do it, and stick to your guns. And I very much credit what I learned from uniformly from people around that very global firm, which all really share that ethos.
What have you learned, I guess, from you know, modifying, iterating, growing out the TD1 fund from the beginning to now? I guess either building the business or with the research. You know, how have you modified this to make it a better fund?
Well, it's a great question, and I think as we were proving the concept over the first several years, we benefited very much from the generosity of now we're up to about 75 donors, but obviously, you know, we started smaller than that. Every one of our donors at this point has a direct connection to type 1 diabetes. Either they have it themselves, in many cases a child or a grandchild, and so it's a very motivated group of, you know, our so-called LPs who are giving away their money. And we told them early on, much to the early chagrin of our development folks, that we were going to build an airplane in the sky, that we saw this problem, and we were pretty sure we knew that this was going to change the answer, but that we were going to go along for a ride and make sure that there was a good feedback loop to change it. And so I'd say, Charlie, the biggest thing that we've evolved over time was, I think when we started it, we had this idea that we would take the best research coming out of academic labs. Most of it's funded by JDRF and by the Helmsley and by a handful of preeminent diabetes centers around the country and around the world. And you know, we take the best things coming out of the research pipeline, and they would, you know, we drop into companies, we'd invest in those companies, we'd attract other VCs along, and off we'd go. We've done some of that. We actually learned over time to a great credit of our first managing director on our staff. We have a professional staff of 6 investors. Our first managing director was a guy named Jonathan Baer, and he had this great idea of finding our way into the portfolio of prominent venture capitalists via their companies by approaching companies that we knew were working on, other diseases, but diseases that had very similar biological mechanisms. So other autoimmune diseases, specifically other autoimmune diseases of the gut, or the endocrine, which is type 1 is a pancreatic disorder. And so our team, our investment staff would approach management teams of these venture-backed companies at the chief scientific officer, chief medical officer, chief executive officer level, and talk to them about their science and how we thought it could be applicable to type 1 diabetes. And sure enough, that worked. So over and over again, and now it's about 2/3 of our 24 companies are companies that decided to add type 1 diabetes to their portfolio of diseases that they were going after, with an investment from us, and oftentimes investment from other institutional VCs alongside, to add type 1 diabetes to their platform. So this is attractive financially for their venture backers, because now you get a few more shots on goal. You get potentially more return out of the investment in your science. And from our perspective, you instantly have this cadre of really, really talented company level executives backed by some of the best life sciences VCs in the world, who now all of a sudden have type 1 in their platform. And it's proven to be a really, really successful way of expanding the universe of investment. We've invested about 65. We're now somewhere in the neighborhood of $325 million of private venture money going into type 1 programs in these companies. So it's extraordinary leverage and a complete transformation of the fight to cure type 1 diabetes over the last 4 years.
That's incredible. It's definitely something to be proud of. And that was actually a really good example of strategy of how to kind of build that out. So I appreciate that as well. Before we kind of get into the next segment, I just want to remind everybody who's watching. I see Patty's out there. Hello, Patty. She's a fan of the show. I mean, I'll tell you, Sean. But ask some questions in the comment bar on YouTube, on LinkedIn, wherever you're watching, so that we could ask these questions. Mike will jump in a little bit, about 10 minutes, to ask those viewer questions. But as you were talking about partnerships, we do like to talk about network and partnerships and collaborations. Can you give us an example of a partnership maybe that's worked in the past, that you could give a specific example? I think you alluded to that, but like, what makes a good partnership, and what are the partnerships you're looking for in the future as well?
We now are co-investors alongside some of the leading life sciences VCs in the world, and I'll give you one example that was just that. Gosh, I wish we could have written this one out in 2015 and predicted it. And it's an extension of the model I just described, where we made an investment in a company called Squeeze, which is SQZ, Squeeze Biotech, up in outside of Boston. It's just recently gone public. It was principally a cancer platform, but the platform technology that they were using, we thought could be applicable to type 1, and the CEO and founder agreed. That company is backed by Polaris Partners, and so obviously they signed off on this expansion of the Squeeze strategy. And then through our relationship with Polaris, we were introduced to another one of their companies called Pandion. Pandion does something called tissue-targeted immunotherapies. They're working on other diseases, not on type 1, but we knew enough about their scientific approach that we thought that it could work. And when we approached them through this Polaris introduction, the management team of Pandion said, sure, we always thought that what we're doing could be really interesting in type 1 diabetes. And a few months later, we made an investment there. Fast forward about a year after that, and Pandion signed on to an industry partnership with a Japanese firm called Astellas, a pharma company, to work specifically on pancreatic targeted therapies. So that kind of sequence of events is sort of, we're trying to achieve a philanthropic objective that all of us at JDRF are just intensely passionate about. And we're trying to achieve that objective using a venture capital model that, we provide know-how and network and passion, which is, don't minimize that. And then the life sciences VCs provide not just capital, which is now, almost 7 times the amount of capital as us, but this isn't just any old capital. This is the best kind of capital that you can get focused on a disease, because it's the life sciences VC community that takes big binary risks and invests in companies to do that in a way that will de-risk them for the pharma companies that'll come along later. I like to tell our donors, this is a billions of dollar problem, not a tens of millions of dollar problem. And so we are using our tens of million as a way to light a fire to bring in the billions of dollars, led by the experts who have done this over and over again in multiple diseases. That's our plan. And every day we go to work thinking about how we're going to pull in those dollars.
If we're talking about aligned partnerships for the future that you're looking for, and we ask this because, again, if somebody catches this on YouTube or if someone catches this on LinkedIn or wherever it may be, I want them to understand exactly kind of the goal that you're trying to get to, the people you're trying to meet. It sounds like obviously the VCs and the life sciences, but are there other partnerships that you're actively looking for right now? Is it the labs, the research labs, new startups that are kind of hit these criteria? But tell us a little bit about the opportunities you're looking for.
Well, it's really all of those. I think that are the primary partnerships that we have surely are with the life sciences VC community, because we're very focused on it. Perhaps another thing that I took away from my years of Bain Capital is I'm just a very, very big believer that if you have, maximize the number of smart people with capital that are focused on a problem, and your odds of success go up exponentially. I don't pretend to be a scientist. I don't even pretend to be a life sciences investor. So I don't know the path that this will take and which one of these therapies will work, but I know that by partnering with people who have been around the block over and over and over again and know what works and what doesn't work, and recruit them effectively, use this philanthropic vehicle to recruit them to our army, that's going to be our biggest success. So that's the primary partnership. I'd probably put on par with that the partnerships that we've been able to develop with entrepreneurs and executives. And this is a pretty fluid market because there's a lot of transactions, and unfortunately a lot of these trials fail. So the executives that we are now partnering with, and we hope to partner with across the life sciences community, that maybe come out of fields of immunology or in now fields like gene therapy and all sorts of other aspects of life sciences that you hear about all the time, those entrepreneurs are also seeing the value here. The academic labs, which you mentioned, surely important. It's a pretty concentrated group of labs in type 1 diabetes. And so we have good relationships through the JDRF with most of those. So I'd say principally the network we're going to be trying to expand is with more and more life sciences VCs and the venture arms of the big pharma companies, the pharma companies themselves, and critically the entrepreneurs that lead these efforts, working around the clock to turn science into business reality. It's a fascinating field to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you're doing a great job of it. Before I flip it over to Mike obviously runs Entre, the networking group. Question we like to ask, I mean, you obviously have a strong network. I think that VC community helps to do that as well, which is kind of aligned with what I'm doing. Is you have some venture capital guys on there, growing companies, they have a huge network. But I'm curious more so for your network and your strategy of network growth. Do you have any tips or tricks that you could share with the Entre community or anyone who's watching?
I guess I'd say two things. The first is hire and retain an awesome investment team. In our case, our managing directors are Stephen St. Peter and Katie Elias. They are, they're extraordinary. They don't have a direct connection to the disease, but to me, they've done something even more important, which is without that connection, still devoting a really sizable portion of their career to that. And by hiring and retaining them, these are well-connected venture capitalists. They've been involved in both operating companies and different venture capital firms. That network is extraordinary. Anybody that's ever been to the JP Morgan conference in January, I guess it'll be virtual this year, but you see the importance of that kind of network. That's not a network that I had. It's not a network that my fellow volunteers on our board had. And so it was critical to us as a board that we hire people that not only are really talented investors and scientists who understand how this field works, but that have really expansive Rolodexes. And we've achieved that with them.
Are you looking for board members or anything else like that?
I'm sorry, the beginning of your question cut off.
I said, are you currently hiring? Or are you looking for board members or anything like that right now?
We are always looking for talent on our staff, particularly at the younger level and at the associate level, and we have a couple of open searches right now. We're building out our scientific advisory board and our business advisory board. There's a lot of enthusiasm about curing this disease. This is the fourth largest autoimmune disease in the United States, and now people are getting their arms around that. So when I mentioned there's sort of a second element besides hiring and retaining a great staff. The other is being an evangelist for a mission, because when people understand that there is a problem that actually should have been solved and we think can be solved, the networking is a lot easier.
Yeah.
People want to join in an effort that that's going to change people's lives, and we very much believe that this kind of a disruptive approach is going to change people's lives.
Yeah, and I'd say you're effectively communicating the problem and the thesis where you're trying to solve and everything that goes along with it. So doing a good job. Let's bring Mike in. I see there's a couple questions coming in from YouTube. What's up, Mike? Do you want to take over the Q&A portion?
Yeah, no, this was awesome. Yeah, we had a couple questions come in. The first one was really kind of based on how are you guys evaluating companies to invest in? Are you, because in the field that you're investing in, a lot of this stuff is, requires a lot of capital just to get through trials and whatnot. How are you evaluating companies? Is it based on valuations, pitch decks? How are you going about, do they have to have some traction or some tests done already to be kind of considered for an investment? Or how are you guys thinking about that when you're talking to some of these startups?
Sure. Well, our investment staff, first and foremost, invests using the same kind of investment criteria that any life sciences VC would use, with the exception that we're always going to have a mission focus on type 1. And that seems like a non-answer to say we do it the same way as everybody else, but it's really critical, actually, because we are not a source of cheap capital. As an example, we're not just investing in anything that's working on type 1. It has to be a relatively small subset. I mean, this is, you're talking about between 5 and 10% of every opportunity that's sent to us. And we're pretty confident that we see just about any opportunity that is in type 1, we tend to see it. We only invest in about 5 or 10% of them for the same reasons that life sciences VCs don't invest in everything that they see. It has to not just be great science. It has to be investable. There has to be an opportunity that there is a real drug that is actually practical, that not only will pass the scientific standard, but is managed by the right people who have a real plan, financing that is achievable, and then we make those investments. In terms of the stage, on our cure side, we sort of have almost all of our companies are invested in cures, which are either immunotherapies or beta cell therapies. Beta cells are the cells that make insulin. We have 2 companies that are in clinical trials and several that are very, very close to starting clinical trials. So it's not uncommon on the cure side, because of just where the market is, that those are relatively early. And so you're making a pretty bold judgment that's not the same kind of judgment you're making maybe in other fields of venture, or certainly in the private equity field, where it's going to be very, very financially driven. You're making some pretty bold assumptions about the viability of science and the people who are going to carry it there. And that's why it's so important for an effort like this to be successful. It's fine to have a guy like me and other folks on our board that are really talented and passionate generally and think about business imperatives and the mission and everything. But without hiring really highly qualified life sciences VCs to do this, there's no chance that an effort like this would ever succeed. I'm not personally qualified to make a judgment that really is based on an awful years and years of experience with these folks about what to pick. I'm not the one who does that. We have a staff that does that, and that's what's most important.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. Very interesting. Are you noticing any, and this kind of relates to the next question here around kind of leadership, have you noticed with the companies that you have invested in, either at Bain and now, and the investors that you do work with, the people on your investment team, are they looking for any specific qualities of founders, entrepreneurs, or early stage startups that kind of give them the edge? Like, okay, this is definitely someone or in a company that I want to invest in. Do you have any similar characteristics or traits that you've noticed from founders that it might be helpful for those listening that are kind of, fundraising or starting companies to think about as they're growing?
Yeah, well, in all organizations, and life science is no exception, leadership is just essential. I mean, obviously, in a life science company, you also have to have the science to back it up. But you want to have a management team, and a lot of times the management teams within these companies are scientists themselves, and so that itself is an evolution, from being a pure scientist to somebody who's running an operating company. And you want to be sure that the leaders of those companies are capable of that really different skill set. That in addition to having the scientific knowledge that they need to have, that they are able to do the things that you would hope a CEO could do, which is have a vision, really have that vision thing, that they're able to explain what we're in this for, that they can hire and retain a great team, and third, and just as importantly, that they can raise money. So whether you're doing that as in a philanthropy like we are, or in these operating companies, it takes an awful long time and an awful lot of money to develop these drugs, and these are all pre-revenue companies. Now, our fund didn't suffer, to date because of COVID, other than, a few minor delays and some of the research work and clinical trials were pretty minor. But one of the reasons we didn't suffer is because none of the companies are making any money. They're all pre-revenue. And that's sort of one of the chief challenges in this space, and why you need the professional class of life sciences VCs who know how to pick them, who have experience in making these really, really bold bets that for decades in this country have changed people's lives.
That's great stuff. I mean, this is super insightful, very helpful. I love what you're doing. It's a great mission. As we wrap up, we always ask kind of one last question, which is personal mantra, ethos, or words to live by that you could leave the community off.
My personal ethos, I don't know. I don't know if I have. I don't know if I have a personal ethos. I will say, when it comes to this, it's make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people who share your mission, and who are willing to ride through the ups and downs and stick to your guns. I don't know how much of a personal ethos that is, but in the case of the T1D Fund, it was the fact that we were associated with a massive organization that was willing to take this kind of disruptive risk, and then we had a group of volunteers around the table who were willing to drive it and believe that you could actually build an airplane in the sky like this. And now, the concept is proven and we're moving on. So it's been really an incredible collaborative effort of a lot of people that care about this. And I think in anything, it's pretty awesome when you can come across something in your life, professional or otherwise, where you see the collective action of a group of really dedicated people can can change whole trajectories. And I think that's what the group of people associated with the T1D Fund has done. And, look, I'll take that with me the rest of my life. That's a really, really important lesson that the power of collective action is extraordinary.
That is definitely a good ethos. Believe me. I mean, it's an ongoing theme of what you said. Surround yourself with really good people, and good things will happen, especially when you're mission focused. So, I appreciate your time. This has been great, super helpful. We'll share this all out and follow up with you soon. If you don't mind staying on as we drop off the air, that'd be great. And where can people find you? I mean, are you on social? Are you on LinkedIn? Where's the best place people can reach out to you?
I am on LinkedIn. That's probably that's probably the best.
Okay, cool, awesome, Sean. Again, appreciate your time. This has been great.
Yeah, Mike, Charlie, thank you so much for drawing attention to this. I appreciate it.
All right, absolutely.